Let's talk about the movie Joker, shall we? Joker was something that we were told was going to be an invitation to violence. That the movie Joker would be something that, as we going forward, look at the history of movies out there and how they could inspire violence. It would be one of the ones that you'd have to think about right away. There was a lot of really fevered speculation about how this movie was going to lead to terrible stuff. Nothing happened, of course. I saw the movie, and I just want to share a few thoughts on this. I don't do a lot of movie reviews on the show. I rarely go to movies. I will say this. I went to a movie theater, and they had assigned seats. And the seats, Producer Mark, have you had this experience? I grew up going to movies with my parents all the time in New York, and I couldn't see over the person's head in front of me. You were packed in there, shoulder to shoulder, not enough legroom. The seats were kind of gross, smelled like stale popcorn and Twizzlers. It just wasn't a pleasant experience, really. But you had no choice if you wanted to see a movie in the theaters. This chair reclined. It was assigned seating.
Yeah, this is very common now.
This is common now?
Yeah, this is everywhere.
This is my first...
Not as much in Manhattan, though. A lot of the theaters in Manhattan are still those old theaters because they're going to sell tickets no matter what. They're in the middle of the city. But they're still all assigned seats now, yeah.
This was my first ever experience in this new era of comfortable seats and big comfortable seats that recline and assigned seating, too. Because one of the things I always hated was when you walk in the theater, especially if you're there with somebody or you're with a group of friends, and you're trying to find a place to sit down and you can't find anywhere to sit. That's not an issue. Now it's like you're at a baseball game. You go to your seat. Go to, M15 or whatever.
You can show up on time. You don't have to watch all the previews if you don't want to.
Yes. Oh, there are a lot of previews.
There are. There's so many previews.
There were too many. That was a thing recently where they were talking about there were too many. It was like 30 minutes of previews, man. I was sitting there all day looking at previews. I can't
if the movie's at 1 o'clock, it's really 1:30.
I can't even remember all of them. All I can remember, though, is that the Star Wars preview looks terrible, dude. Looks terrible.
I'm not a Star Wars guy.
You're not a Star Wars guy?
No.
I like the originals, but this Star Wars it's just garbage. Anyway, so the theater was really nice. I checked that part of it. That was kind of cool. Although we do need somebody who stands there and doesn't allow people to talk, because people get all cozy. They get in their big comfy chair, their assigned seat, and they think. The worst is that people think that when it gets loud, that's when you really want to talk. So it's like the soaring music comes in, or there's like a really intense scene, like the car chase scene. They're like, yeah, so because it's loud in here, you can hear them. It's like, shut up. I do not want to hear when they're doing the thing, when they're talking and,
Living room syndrome.
Yeah.
They think they're in their living room.
It's not your living room. So that's not really about the Joker movie, but I was, because I'm somebody I stopped going to movies because I thought it was such a negative, it's just a bad user experience. And I love watching a flat screen on my big couch. Like, my couch is basically half my living room. I have a giant couch. I'm one of those people that's like, I want a giant couch. I don't want a little fancy couch. It's like, oh, are we going to have tea on my fancy couch? No. I want a big couch. Like I live in a suburban house, except I live in a shoebox.
Big comfy couch.
Big comfy couch.
I agree with you.
Yeah, exactly. You need a big comfy couch. So the theater situation was better than I thought. All right, and then on the movie Joker itself. I grew up liking comics, reading some comics, but definitely watching all the different comic shows. I mean, I watched the old X-Men cartoon that was on Saturday mornings back in the day. I watched the Spider-Man cartoons. I liked all that Marvel and DC Universe stuff. And I'm sure a lot of you do too. So for me, the way that they created a backstory for a character that there's already been a tremendous amount of content created around was pretty impressive. Was pretty solid. And to take on a role where you're immediately going to be compared to Heath Ledger's Oscar-winning role was also, I think, a pretty bold move. But Joaquin Phoenix definitely pulled it off. And what you see in the movie, and I think that there are real lessons from this. I think that this is important for people to see. You see the creation, in a sense, of a monster, right? I mean, not that any human being can ever fully become a monster, but you see the creation of a monster through frustration, negative circumstance, in this case, a big dose of dangerous mental illness, but you see the way that he really transitions into somebody who is a dangerous, violent maniac, and they do it in such a way that you think about it afterwards. You wonder, you think, well, what should the Joker, what should this character have done in response to the circumstances of having an abuse? I don't want to give too much away. Apparently, we maybe read a spoiler recently on the show, but it's not really a spoiler. If you see the movie, it doesn't really matter. I think you can see it all coming a mile away anyway. But so on the production value side of it, the acting side of it, Joaquin Phoenix carries the movie. It's just a character study, and he does a phenomenal job. I've thought he was excellent ever since he played Commodus in Gladiator. Why don't the people love me? I will give them games. He was so good. Now they love Maximus for his mercy. I've seen that movie way too many times. It's a great. That's a timeless movie. That's one of those things that's on. If Gladiator's on TV on just normal channels, whatever part of the movie, I probably will watch it. It's one of those. It's up there with Tombstone. Tombstone, it could be the first 20 minutes, the last 10 minutes, doesn't matter. I'm watching it. I'm your Huckleberry. It's the best. The best. But back to the Joker film. It wasn't really that violent. It was way less violent than I was anticipating. And what I thought was so interesting, and one of the reasons I want to talk about on the show, was the way that it was set up. It was supposed to be, we were supposed to believe that this was a incel, white man rage justifying movie. And it absolutely was not that. And there's no reasonable way to go from A to B there. There's no reasonable way to look at this movie and say to yourself, yeah, that's what was going on. Yeah, it was about justifying, either like white nationalism or white supremacy and incel. There's been some of these guys who are involuntary celibate. That's what incel means. Essentially, their frustration with the opposite sex leads them, or that's the spark in their deranged minds for becoming mass shooters. There have been a few cases of this, but it's not that either. This is a very sad and troubling story of somebody who was given a bad deck of cards to start with, and then plays that hand poorly and makes some bad choices, makes bad decisions. And I didn't think the violence was too extreme, but I just also thought that the left-wing version of this movie shows you that they can find things. They'll find narratives where they do not exist. We know that from politics, but they'll do it even in film. If anything, the Joker movie was, if Joker had politics from this movie, he's a democratic socialist. I mean, the Joker's a Bernie Sanders supporter. He's an Elizabeth Warren supporter. He's not a Trump supporter. That's for sure. Trump would be like, this guy's a loser. That's what Trump would say about him. And he is a loser, and then he turns into a homicidal one at that. But it was worthwhile. And the way they wove in some elements of the existing DC Batman storyline into it, it was very good. It was very well done. Have you seen it yet, by the way, producer Mark?
Not yet. I'm going to go this weekend.
Yeah, you should definitely check it out.
I need to.
We want to hear it. Let us know what you think about
I will.
it. I think you'll... I give it like B plus, A minus.
Now, how come you'd go see a Joker movie, but God forbid you'd see the Avengers movies?
I mean, the Avengers movies are trash for people God. They're trash, dude.
They're not.
It's just...
You're wrong.
It's just all CGI and really bad jokes. But,
so there was no CGI used in the Joker movie at all?
I very little. I don't know.
Come on.
Very little.
I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure there's plenty.
You know what there is, producer Mark, in the Joker movie that I appreciate? Acting.
There's acting in the Marvel
movies.
There is
plenty. The problem here is, unfortunately, the audience is going to agree with producer Mark that because they make $1 billion.
The audience is smart.
They make $1 billion and blah blah. Whatever. The only thing that's worth watching in any of those Avengers movies is Robert Downey Jr. I'm just going to say it. Hulk smash. Come on. How many times we got to hear that? And there's always
he even says Hulk smash once.
No, he doesn't say that. I'm saying the other.
I meant the Hulk.
He says that. Like a few times.
No, he doesn't.
Whatever. All right, so you've heard producer Mark likes the Avengers movies, so you can light us up in the comments and let us know if you agree or disagree. I find them unwatchable. And I'm somebody, I like the Batman trilogy, although the third one is People of Gotham. I mean, the third one, there's some ridiculous stuff going on there. I like Blade. I like that's a throwback. I think that's among Wesley Snipes' finest works. Blade. It's a good flick back in the day. And the original Iron Man is very good. All right. I've turned this into a longer movie review than I meant. See the Joker. It's good. It's worthwhile. Makes you think about some things. and it will affect you. And it did not lead to any mass shootings. That's crazy.
Senator, this plan that you're introducing today, the wealth tax is going to pay for this and other things.
Yes.
So how is your Medicare for All proposal going to be paid for, though, without the wealth tax?
So, as I've explained, the wealth tax will pay for universal child care all the way through canceling student loan debt. It's about an investment in an entire generation. Over the next few weeks, I'll be coming out with a plan about the costs of Medicare for All and how we can pay for it.
My friend PJ O'Rourke works with me. He's the editor-in-chief. I'm a writer for a project called American Consequences. It's free. You can sign up for it, and I hope you do. I write a piece a week for them, and usually a monthly feature as well. PJ's got a great piece here on Elizabeth Warren, who my wealth tax is just going to take from the rich, and it's going to pay for all the child care across this nation. There's some interesting stuff that PJ writes about here on Elizabeth Warren's real plans for you. Here's what my friend PJ O'Rourke writes in American Consequences. As scary words go, I have a plan for that is right up there with hold my beer. Warren thinks we can improve our economy by returning personal and corporate income taxes to Clinton-era levels. Are higher taxes good for the economy? U.S. GDP per capita, adjusted for inflation, $44,314 in 1998. $57,000, so this is GDP per capita, not household income. That was a mistake I made before on the show. $57,821 now. Warren also wants to impose a wealth tax on the net worth of individuals, 2% on net worth above $50 million and 3% on net worth above $1 billion. The current yield on 2-year Treasury bonds is 1.5%. For a conservatively invested billionaire, that means a 200% tax on income on top of the income tax he or she is already paying. In anything except politics, we'd call this stealing. But don't try to take the money and run. Warren proposes a 40% exit tax on expatriation of wealth exceeding $50 million. The island that Wall Street's moneyed elite will be living on won't be Grand Cayman. It will be Rikers Island. Warren doesn't seem to like rich people very much, never mind that according to public financial disclosure forms, she and her husband have a net worth between $4 and $11 million. End quote. PJ O'Rourke here, my friend and colleague, taking Elizabeth Warren to task for this. The wealth tax is going to set up all kinds of dislocations in the economy and create a new regime where the IRS is not going to just be looking at what you make, we'll be looking at what you have and assessing based on that how much you're going to pay. The wealth tax may start at 2%, but maybe then it goes up to 4%. Maybe then the idea becomes nobody, and I've heard people say this, you will hear occasionally progressives say this out loud, nobody should be worth more than $10 million, they'll say. Nobody needs more than $10 million. You might say, why not $100 million? Well, because they say so. The same mentality that believes that central planning by the government will lead to good outcomes thinks that we can just pull a number out of the air and that's all you need. That's the max net worth that would appeal to people, right? That would be acceptable for people. Whether it appeals to them or not is a whole different matter. But Warren is, in many ways, quite radical. PJ goes on to talk about her plans for corporations. Quote, Warren has proposed that large corporations should be required to allow employees to elect 40% of corporate board members. And that's how somebody's brother-in-law wearing flip-flops, cargo shorts, and a Patriots jersey ends up at the board table scratching his stomach and drinking a beer. You can't blame the guy from the loading dock who nominated him. His wife had been on him for years to get her brother a job. She also proposes limiting the gender pay gap, PJ writes, with the Paycheck Fairness Act legislation. And Warren thinks the federal minimum wage should be $22 an hour. Folks, this stuff is all really going to have that would have dramatic effect. Now I know you say, Buck, but she'll need the legislature to go along with her. And well, what we know about Democrats is that sometimes they'll just do things by executive fiat. Sometimes there'll be a determination made that they can't wait. But if you want to read more of PJ's essay there, AmericanConsequences.com. That's where you can read it, and I write there too. And you can sign up for their newsletter. I send a newsletter out every week. It's very cool. So you can check it out. Oh, by the way, the concern over Elizabeth Warren, I think, is what has led in part to the possibility of some very late entrants getting into the race. There are people now, there are some stories out there now. Like here's one from the New York Times. Quote, Mrs. Clinton and Michael Bloomberg have both told people privately in recent weeks that if they thought they could win, they would consider entering the primary. She has not given up. Do not believe anybody who tells you otherwise. Do not, don't let the propagandists change your mind on this one. She has not decided that she needs to accept a future in which she will never be president. It's just not there. It has not happened. Her belief very clearly is that she did win the 2016 election, even though she didn't. And she may be the only candidate in her mind who can fully unite the Democratic Party and defeat Trump. And therefore, in Hillary Clinton's, oh my gosh, world, she is the necessary candidate for this moment. Not just a candidate, the necessary candidate. It doesn't require that much thinking like a liberal to get us there. This is not a massive departure from what Hillary is already saying in public and what we're already seeing. In fact, the New York Times had published a piece about Hillary, about whether she's a master troll, whether she is excellent at trolling people now. Master troll ? Freed of the constraints of public office, Mrs. Clinton seems to be living her best life. There are still Hillary superfans all throughout the media. They haven't given up either. I'm not saying it's like, you've heard me, I think I've said 10 or 20% chance Hillary enters the race. It's still very much a chance. And when you see Joe Biden fading, Bernie Sanders is not healthy enough, nor is he compelling enough really as a candidate. Elizabeth Warren seems like big harsh. She talks like this, and she looks like someone you could sit down and have some nice chamomile tea with. She's radical. And the rest of the Democrat candidates aren't getting any traction. So is there a future in which Hillary Clinton maybe does jump into this thing? I can't tell you. I can't tell you it's a no, and more importantly, neither will Hillary Clinton. For the first time, there are now more rich Chinese than rich Americans. China now accounts for 100 million of the richest 10% of people in the world. There are 99 million Americans in the same category. An interesting statistic here from CNN, from their business section, that if you look at the 10% of the wealthiest people in the world, there are more Chinese who fit into that 10% than there are Americans. And this is the first time that has ever happened. The U.S. still has many more millionaires, 18.6 million, or 40% of the world's total, versus 4.4 million in China. And it's adding millionaires faster. And the average American is still much richer than their Chinese counterparts. U.S. wealth per adult is $432,365 compared with $58,544 in China. But China is growing rapidly. And the Chinese entry into the middle class is having major impact on global markets and on geopolitics, because now you have hundreds of millions of people in China who've been lifted out of poverty, and they are going to have their own aspirations, goals, and yes, this will play out at the nation-state level as well for China. I just wanted to share with you, I had a conversation recently with a friend of mine who is a a very knowledgeable China expert, speaks fluent Mandarin, and he was saying to me that things have changed in China dramatically. That it used to be the Chinese attitude on the mainland was if you were a visiting American, and I'd heard this before too, they were so happy to see you. There was such a sense of being pleased that anyone's willing to even visit and go see China and experience its culture. And that was true through the 90s and the early 2000s, but there's been a change now. And a lot of Chinese, and this is coming from they have a very lockdown state propaganda media. A lot of Chinese are being told that there are external forces that are trying to hold them down, that America is trying to box them in and prevent them from from achieving their true destiny, and that the Chinese people are on a pathway to become the world leaders in everything, the wealthiest, dominant military power, dominant culture. And America is the one thing that's standing in their way, and that has resulted in a change in attitudes, widespread change in attitude, particularly in the major cities in China, about Americans, even on an individual level. That there is it's much more likely. This is a friend of mine who lived in China for years, saying that it's much more likely that you would experience hostility from Chinese nationals now when you visit than you would before. That there's much less of a sense of wonder and excitement about anything American, that our culture is considered more invasive now in many ways than something that was admirable and desirable even. They have their own way of doing. Now, I'm not saying this is everybody. We're speaking about a country with 1 billion people, but this is a much more prevalent perception among the Chinese. And I've heard this from other people. And I'll tell you, I feel like I experienced a little bit of this as well just when I was visiting there for a week. You come across rural Chinese visiting Beijing, and they see an American and they smile. And but you deal with Chinese in Beijing day to day, and they're not looking to help you out. In fact, in Shanghai, you deal with a lot of people who, the second they see you're a Westerner, they're just trying to rip you off. And that was told to me by people running businesses in China, that there's just a sense of, if you rip off a Westerner, a foreigner, even if it's an expat who's living in Shanghai, that's fine. You're just kind of evening the playing field a little bit. It's a much more aggressive, much more nationalistic culture you're dealing with in China than you used to have. And this is from people I know, and they're saying that, just look at how they wield Chinese financial influence to shut down conversations in the NBA, and look at the way that they will harass and suppress academics who speak ill of China or who are critical of the Chinese approach to anything. My friends, we have been asleep at the wheel as a country and seeing what's going on here with China and being willing to confront it. And I know that President Trump, in a lot of ways, he's a blunt instrument. But with the China situation, he was the first one who was really willing to say, this has got to stop. We have a real problem. He has been ringing the alarm bell on China, not just as president, but for many, many years before it. He has been right. This is a country that is going to pose very serious, not just economic challenges for us, but down the line, it's going to be security challenges. And I don't just mean stealing our intellectual property. I mean, we're going to have to be worried about a China that is building bases all over the world, that's flexing its muscles all over the world. It wants global dominance, and global dominance through a system that is truly authoritarian, really totalitarian, wants to control your thoughts, your speech, the social credit system that's in place that tells you whether or not you can get good dates online. I mean, they have really taken this stuff to a new level, and it doesn't look like they're going to collapse or have a massive financial reset anytime soon. It's slowed down a little bit because of the trade war with America, but if anything, the trade war that has been ongoing has raised awareness, to borrow from the left, about the real challenges that China poses to us, real challenges that we face from China. So when you see these statistics about the percentage of the wealthiest 10% of the world that are from China, it is a reminder that they are gaining on us, and their intentions, this is not like the EU being a bigger, the EU is a bigger economy than the United States. but it's a lot of countries put together. But that doesn't keep us up late at night. We don't worry about that. No one thinks that we're going to have to worry about the French invading us anytime soon, or the French building a blue water navy to rival ours and then kick us out of whole areas of the ocean. Those are real concerns with China. And what is China going to do going forward with Taiwan? And what is it going to, I think the best strategy that we have, other than recognition that China is a competitor, a true near-peer competitor, not some country that we just need to be strengthening ties with all the time, and let them do whatever they want to our economy, to our intellectual property. We want to be as close as possible. I mean, I think that the U.S. focus on closer ties with India should be much more a much stronger effort, and also the U.S. effort to build up the so-called littoral, Littoral. I don't know why I spelled that out for you guys. All know it, but just reminding myself. States like the Japanese, the Philippines, or the South Korea. You look at all these different, Malaysia, Vietnam, all countries that we want to be self-sufficient, powerful, and a block on Chinese ambitions, because we want balance in that region. We do not want one hegemon that's pushing everybody around and getting its way all the time, because if that happens, there's only one hegemon that they can look to beyond their near abroad, and that's going to be us. We are heading for a showdown with China. It's just a question of when it happens and how it happens. And I think that there's a greater awareness now, and there's been a change in Chinese nationalist mentality that even if you're just a tourist showing up there, you may be quite aware of it. And I've been speaking to people that are telling me that's exactly what's going on.
Hey, Team Buck, it's time for roll call.
Team Buck at iHeartMedia.com. If you want to send us thoughts, please do. That's how we get the roll call going here. Let's start it off with my man Andrew, who writes, Buck, I installed the Pluto app on my Apple TV exclusively because of your presence. I've been OG Team Buck before it was a thing, as evidence to the screenshot in this email. Yes, I enjoy the show as much now as I did when you filled in for Glenn on July 18th, 2013, and I stand by my original claim that you are the legitimate heir to Rush Limbaugh. Shields high from Wowo Land, Andrew. Well, Andrew, man, thank you so much. That is very high praise, and it's really kind of you and appreciated. And sent me a screenshot from July of 2013. I can't believe I've been doing this as long as I have. He wrote to Glenn. This is when I worked for Glenn Beck. Glenn, I'm really enjoying Buck Sexton as a fill-in host today. His points and analysis are brilliant. He reminds me of a young Rush Limbaugh. Regards, Andrew. Andrew, thank you so much, man. You have certainly been OG Team Buck, and we like to say OSS for Original Saturday Squad. But thank you so much for writing in, and the kind words always are appreciated, guys, because in the media business, you get a lot of people telling you not good enough, not big enough, not whatever enough, and the only thing that really keeps you going a lot of days, the only thing that keeps me going a lot of days is all of you who listen and watch. That's it. And the desire to avoid getting a real job. David writes, you do the best Beto. I've never heard anybody else even try to do his accent or his voice, probably because they can't even come close to you. Got to work on your Elizabeth Ward a little bit. Wow, excuse me, sir. Ask producer Mark if you sound a little like Tolley from South Park. I don't know who that is. Who's Tolley from South Park?
I don't know who that is either.
Oh. Love your show. I listen to a lot of talk radio, and out of all of them, you are the closest to Rush with your real-world analysis. Thanks, David. Well, thank you so much, David. That's very kind. Another Rush comparison. You guys do me great honor with that. And thank you so much for writing in and saying all of the kind things. Chris, we're doing emails today because we did Facebook yesterday. If you want to send Facebook messages, though, facebook.com/BuckSexton and teambuck@iHeartMedia.com for the email address. Chris writes, hey, Buck, my daughter was invited to a 3-day ACLU camp. Huh. I tried to explain to her why it wasn't a great idea, but then when I searched the internet, I found that I supported many of their positions on free speech. I know the individual members are extremely liberal, but they are free speech advocates, even for undesirable groups like the KKK, so it doesn't seem like they play favorites. During the Reagan era, the biggest insult in the Republican circles was being a card-carrying member of the ACLU. So is the ACLU okay? Now, Chris, is a very interesting question. The ACLU is a left-wing organization with a left-wing agenda. Does the ACLU sometimes stand on a principle of free speech that is truly about free speech and not just about advancing the left-wing agenda? Yes, indeed. But if you look at, for example, when the ACLU will and will not bring a case, there's a tendency to go after Christian religious organizations, First Amendment issues, and not, for example, Muslim religious organizations on First Amendment issues, right? There's certainly cases where the ACLU is showing a left-wing bias. You see that a lot. And then there's another part of this is that the ACLU on the issue of, I think I'd have to look at their recent positions, but I'm pretty sure on hate speech, they're very, they take the position, they're getting closer and closer to speech equals violence, which is the eradication of the First Amendment, really. If speech equals violence just because you don't like certain speech. But I'd have to look at some of their more recent decisions. But when they bring cases and when they don't, that alone shows you the ACLU is a left-wing group, but even left-wing groups can do good things. You know, Tulsi Gabbard hates the president, is a progressive, wants Medicare for all, and believes in climate change. But I've been sitting here saying, well, at least she doesn't want third trimester abortion and doesn't say that Trump supporters are all Nazis. So she's, there's good things, there's bad things. ACLU is mostly about destroying. The ACLU really at its core now has been leveraged by the left to destroy Judeo-Christian culture and conservatism in America. That is the ultimate. It's not protecting freedom. And I could pull some examples of why that is, but I'd have to do a little bit of a deep dive on it. Brandon, Buck, I agree with another member of Team Buck. Joker was boring. Story and acting were good, but pace is very slow. And sorry, but there was a spoiler of sorts. Blah, blah. Brandon. All right, Brandon. Brandon, you, sir, are entitled to your opinion. I think that I will say this about Joker, since we're back on the topic. When I saw that it's 2 hours, this is a big mistake. Most movies, you really want it to be 90 minutes. You want an hour and a half. 3 acts, 30 minutes an act. That's it. That's the sweet spot. Now, of course, there's Braveheart, which went on for like 10 years. I mean, there's some movies that are amazing and are very long, but usually I think that you could have cut 20 minutes out of Joker, for example, and made it a better movie. If you cut 20 minutes out, it would be a better movie. That's what I think. It was too long. So I would agree with that. I wouldn't say it's boring, but I do think it was too long. Let's see. Kathy. Hey, Buck. Listening to the podcast, there's a time in the podcast where Beto is talking about the pressing Nazi tactics, and you start speaking in the background. I don't think you meant for Beto to speak over you. Just thought I'd mention this since this is not the first time I've heard this happen. Shields high, Kathy from Georgia. Yeah, Kathy, thank you. People brought this to my attention last night. Producer Mark has a brilliant strategy for me to avoid this called Don't Talk During Clips, Buck. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a great strategy.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also part of the new studio operation, so I won't put all the blame on you.
Thank you.
It
It's
is
a
the
little bit
board
more
here,
than
too.
just, it's not just all about the Buckster getting a little too excited, but yeah, no, we will try to avoid that. Mark will wave me off now because I sometimes like to talk while these clips are going in the past, but we don't really have the setup here for that. So we'll try to avoid that for a whole bunch of reasons. Oh, wow, look at this. Andy writes, hello, Buck. Just wanted to say you have a fan base in New Zealand that really enjoys your show. Oh, we got some Kiwi Team Buck. A lot of us here closely follow American politics and relate to conservative and libertarian ideologies. Our country has dramatically changed with the election of a far-left government, and following our recent terror attack, things are moving very quickly. Imagine Justin Trudeau, but with venom. Anyway, your show is always on point, and that Hans Gruber voice the other week had me in hysterics. Keep up the good work. Cheers, Andy. Well, Andy, not quite the land down under, right? That's Australia, but whatever the cool way to say New Zealand, the land of Frodo and the Hobbits, because that's where they filmed the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Sure.
Yeah. Just thank you to Kiwi Team Buck, man, down there in New Zealand, and thank you for writing in. And I don't know, was it the Hans Booby? Was it that accent, or was it the British, like Mr. Takagi? I can't remember now, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. That's the show. Check it out on podcast. Tell people. Shields high.